Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Regalado. On behalf of everyone working behind the scenes, I'd like to thank you for joining the Country First Front Lines of Freedom Campfire. We're honored you've taken some time to join us in reflecting on the importance of good, reasonable people coming together to make democracy healthier and work better for everyone. Here at Country First, we welcome all reasonable people of goodwill, from all parties and of none. We're creating a home for the reasonable majority, many of whom feel politically homeless. We're all bound by the belief that we must put country before party, and that we're Americans before anything else. The Country First movement is a national grassroots organization composed of hundreds of thousands of members and growing. Some of you here tonight may be new, and others of you might have been with us since January 2021. Either way, we would not be here without all of you, our committed members and volunteers from all across the United States who are working hard to make our country a better place. So without further ado, I want to welcome our founder of the Country First movement, as well as veteran of the United States Air Force, Congress, and the January 6th committee. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Adam Kinzinger. I think we having a little sound issue, but we're going to need to make sure that the congressman's unmuted. But one thing for the audience, for those that didn't know, yesterday was the congressman's birthday. So I want to officially wish him happy birthday. And we have a little bit of a surprise for him from the Country First family. So we'll pull that up right now.
We're happy you were born is the understatement of the century. Thank you for everything. Many happy years ahead and healthy ones.
I just wanted to stop by and take a moment to wish you a happy birthday and to personally thank you for all you're doing to help fight for our democracy and to keep it alive for future generations. I hope you have a wonderful day, and thanks again for all you do.
Happy birthday, Adam.
Happy birthday, Dada. Happy birthday. We love you.
Happy birthday, Adam.
Surprise!
That was pretty cool. I didn't expect that. Thank you. That's was very nice. Thank you for everybody in there, and thanks for all the good birthday wishes. I'm 46, and it feels like it's only been about 3 years in the last 20. So hopefully the next 40 some years don't go as fast.
I love it. So, Congressman, again, thanks for being here tonight. As you know, we're here to talk about the front lines of freedom, both here at home, but also abroad. So let's just jump right into it. It's been 2 full years since Russia has invaded Ukraine. To get us started tonight, what can you share with the audience about where your head and heart are at the moment on this topic?
Well, look, just generally speaking, I'm sad. It's on the one hand, I'm very proud of what Ukraine is doing, at the fight they're putting up, at the battle these young men and women are fighting every day. And it's not just young men and women. I mean, there are some people drafted in their 40s on the front line in their 40s and 50s. But watching, an entire country that had a lot of differences. As we joke about sometimes, the old saying in Ukraine was, you just put 2 Ukrainians in a room and they'll create 3 political parties, because there was always division and separation, which is okay. And that's actually fine in a democracy. But now you see, when that democracy is under threat, Ukrainians have come together. They're fighting together in the trenches. I mean, one guy in the trench may be a machinist next to a piano player, next to a teacher. I mean, there are people from all different walks of life that, unfortunately, in many cases, have actually put their life on the line to defend their country. So I guess I would say this: on the one hand, I'm proud watching them. On the other hand, I'm actually really sad, because in just a month, really in just 2 months, we've gone from this optimistic feeling that nobody can beat Ukraine, and that Russia will certainly collapse, to this moment of not supplying them. of the United States seemingly to turn their back on Ukraine after telling Ukraine to fight and saying that we would be with you till the end. MAGA Republicans in Congress have blocked aid. And we'll talk a little bit about how to fix that. But I would say generally my heart is in a place right now of extreme concern. I very rarely, Andrew and everybody, have ever lost sleep over issues. And I will honestly say I have lost sleep over this one, thinking of the ramifications if Ukraine loses and if America once again turns its back on an ally. What does that mean for the future? What does that mean for anybody willing to help us? So this is a very important moment for us right now as a movement to make sure that we're holding people accountable and fighting for those fighting for their own freedom.
Definitely, just humanizing all of it. And as you were talking, definitely, I feel right there with you, and just compassion, and, it's a tough time. But I think, kind of like you were saying, it's a heartfelt time, but also, it's a bit scary. I think myself, many of us here tonight, we're seeing a lot of similar themes to the 1940s, like toxic nationalism, to justify not standing with, our European allies in this fight against authoritarianism. And so, just to make sure everyone knows exactly what I'm getting at, I want to pull up a quick video clip to show an example from the past. Let's take a quick look.
At the Manhattan Center, hundreds attend a rally. Tonight's speaker is a famed aviator and American hero, Charles Lindbergh. Lindbergh is a Nazi sympathizer, an avid opponent of U.S. involvement in the overseas conflict.
France has now been defeated, and despite the propaganda and confusion of recent months, it is now obvious that England is losing the war. I believe
the call is to abandon America's friend and ally.
And I have been forced to the conclusion that we cannot win this war for England regardless of how much assistance we send. That is why the America First Committee has been formed.
And so right there, as you heard in the video, America First, we're hearing a lot of the same things from Donald Trump and the far right of the party. And so can you just share your reaction with us, Congressman? And, if you think we still have a chance to learn from history and correct course.
Yeah, it's really chilling. I mean, I remember as a kid, as I'm sure everybody on here does, learning about that time period in the 30s leading up to World War II. And I guess I never really fully understood when you would read about like division, or you would read about, in essence, a Nazi movement in the United States and the open communist movement as well. You read that in history with the context of, yeah, but we know what happened. We know that the United States got involved. We know the United States rallied around our cause. And we crushed Nazism. And we crushed it abroad, but we crushed it here too. And, for people like Lindbergh to have, said what he said and been part of that is surprising to us, particularly as, somebody we consider a bit of a hero. And I'm sure there's a lot of shame that comes. And so I see that, and it just brings me to this moment we're in today where, we look back on 80 years of the post-World War II order, of the United States really being at least one of the powers that can influence and write the rules for the economy, for the world, for peace. And looking at the fact that we are in this moment of repeat, where there's this push for isolation, which is just impossible now. In a world as connected as we are, isolationism is just not even realistic. It's not possible. To watch these people being sucked in by this like darkness, by this dark art, by this fear mongering, by this just hatred. I never would have imagined it would be my party doing it, by the way. But I never imagined it would ever happen again. And I think we have a lot to learn from that, which is, unfortunately, and I'm not going to do justice to this, but there's the old saying of like, history never repeats, but it does rhyme, or something like that. I don't know. But the point is that these cycles happen over and over again. And I guess I never really understood that, and now I kind of do. But, we live in a moment where we have an opportunity to crush this darkness that's coming up. We have an opportunity to make a difference. Just a few people can make that difference, to be honest with you. I want to, and you'll forgive me now that I'm 46, I have to use glasses, but I want to talk to you a little bit about what we need to do today. With what's going on in Ukraine, you think about the fact that, again, you have broad bipartisan support. In fact, I think if Ukraine aid would go on the floor of the House, it would pass overwhelmingly. But it is being shut down right now by people who are peddling in fear, by people like Tucker Carlson. And we could have just a few people make a difference. I saw some estimates that I'm reading here. It's like Ukraine could be within a month of a collapsing line because of the lack of aid from the United States. Let's look, not to get deep into military technicals here, but Ukraine can last if they have great firepower, which they've had. Now, when they're having to ration artillery, what's happening is now they have to replace artillery with manpower. And men get injured, men get killed, and that hurts morale. When morale is hurt, it's tougher to fight. Now, by the way, I talked to an American that fought in Ukraine for 9 months this weekend, and he was just talking about the horrors of that war. But we believe that we can apply pressure as a movement, which is one of the big things we want to talk about, to help certain members of the GOP compel action. There are members who have announced their retirements, who aren't running again. They don't have to worry about a primary, that should be compelled to vote against rules on the floor to force the vote in the House of Representatives. I think we only need 3 or 4 members to do that. To give you the quick background, everything that happens on the floor of the House is guided by a rule. And typically, the majority party always votes for the rule, and that creates action on the House as the majority party wants it to be. If only 4 members of the GOP, and just take the ones that are retiring, that care about Ukraine, went to the Speaker of the House and said, we will vote against every rule until you agree to put Ukraine funding on the floor, he would do that in a week because the House would be frozen shut. This is exactly what the Freedom Caucus does, and to be honest with you, they do it to great success. So I want to talk about what you can do as a Country First member and why I think this is so important for us to talk about this and try to compel this action. We believe that this next part would be much more impactful, that the thing that we can do would be much more impactful if we can all directly ask our members of Congress, if we can discuss with our members of Congress, if we can tweet, if we can put stuff out on Instagram, if we can do whatever we can to ensure that they act. And you see right now some of the things you can do. Obviously, you can visit Country First. We've identified, if you go to countryfirst.com/Ukraine, we've identified key members of Congress that we think should be really apt to do this, to vote against the rules, to compel action, even things like signing the discharge petition. You can call them with that ask. You can call your own members of Congress. You can sign the petition that we have. You can RSVP for Ukraine Days of Action, and certainly share this with your friends and family. This is such an important moment that we have to think outside of just putting up a tweet and just being sad. How can we get this message to members of Congress? And that's what I want to compel us to do, to get out there, get loud, to remind these Republicans that they will build statues to them in Kyiv if just 4 of them do the right thing. It's not even that hard. It's kind of politically hard. But trust me, I've done politically hard things. It's very rewarding. So again, those are some calls to action. And we certainly would hope and appreciate you all helping on that. And I thank you for your attention to this matter.
Sorry, I was on mute. So, Congressman, how can we kind of get back to a place where freedom is worth defending? It seems like freedom, we're talking about overseas is at risk, but at home, there are these Russian sympathizers, Putin, loving members of Congress. What about what's happening here at home?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a moment where we have to be very aware of this like dark arts, the seductive arts that are pulling people in. We have to push back against it with truth. Truth matters. Truth is a big thing that we look. I get it. Sometimes it's frustrating. Here's the advantage the other side has. The other side loves chaos. When they create chaos, they get energized. People like you and I, we don't love chaos. In fact, it fatigues us. That's an advantage they have, and that's what they're taking advantage of. That's what they're counting on. So what we can do, besides something I'm going to talk about in a second, what we can do is take the burden of the world off our shoulders, understand that we alone can't save the world, but we as a team can make a huge difference, because that makes sure that you're going to stay engaged, that you'll stay involved, that you'll stay heartened, because the fight in November is who can stay heartened until that day, who can continue to fight together. And the other side is assuming that the chaos will tear us apart. And that's what we can't have. Now, I'm going to refer to my notes because I don't want to mess this part up, because it's 2024 and we know that elections matter and elections have consequences. And there's a lot of interesting elections going on right now. We're going to continue at Country First to be on the front lines of freedom at home. We're going to be pushing back against Donald Trump. We're going to be pushing back against authoritarianism in MAGA. I'm excited to share about a race that I've been watching really closely with everybody tonight. And it's a race where I believe that we as an organization can make a real difference. So next month, the great state of Ohio is going to be having their primary elections. It's, I think, March 19th. And guess what? Ohio is an open primary state. Now, let's keep in mind, that means independents and Democrats can vote in the primary. We've seen Nikki Haley, by the way, hitting 30 to 40% in all of these primaries. So that's an important part. That means that any registered voter can show up and request a ballot from either party. There's currently a very unique race in Ohio's 2nd Congressional District. The current representative announced that he's retiring, which makes it an open seat. But Ohio, too, it's one of the deepest Republican districts in the country, meaning that it's basically guaranteed that a Republican is going to represent that district. Now, there's 12 candidates running in the primary, and most of them are actually just competing to be, the all-star of the MAGA Olympics. Like, who's more MAGA? No, I'm more MAGA. You're more MAGA. But there is one candidate in this race that I'd consider my kind of Republican. He's one who stands for truth. He has principles. He believes that January 6th was far from anything peaceful. He actually believes that it was an insurrection, and he knows that we have to come together if we're going to get out of this troubling moment. Now, a lot of people tell me that these candidates have no shot to win, and let's be honest, most of the time they don't. But as I mentioned, there's 12 candidates in this race, which means that the votes have the potential to be split up very dramatically. And it could only take a small fraction of votes to win and to pull ahead. And better yet, the leading Democrat that was running in the Democratic primary dropped out and actually encouraged people to vote in the Republican primary. This is a unique opportunity for our coalition to push back against MAGA in a sane, reasonable, and problem-solving candidate to be able to push back and go to Congress to represent the district. If we get enough Democrats, independents, disaffected Republicans to vote for this candidate, he could win the race. So I want to introduce everybody here tonight to a pro-freedom, pro-democracy candidate that I'm proud to endorse for Ohio's 2nd Congressional District, my good friend, Phil Heimlich. Phil, welcome to our Campfire. And you and I agree certainly on many things, and we certainly agree on the state of our party. It's lost its way, and Donald Trump and extreme forces have taken the wheel. We've both faced, I think this is putting it mildly, we both faced fire in recent years for speaking out. Now, not everyone here tonight may be familiar with you and your efforts. So how about you let everybody know a little more about yourself and how you've taken a stand for truth since 2020?
Well, thanks, Adam. And happy birthday. And I enjoyed the Jimi Hendrix serenade of you. my background is that I was an assistant prosecutor in Cincinnati for about 10 years, and then I served 8 years on Cincinnati City Council, and then 4 years as a county commissioner. And I was known as the most conservative leader in the area and was often kind of attacked for being too conservative. And when Trump ran for his first election, you see, when I was a prosecutor, I prosecuted white collar crime, which basically means con men. Okay. And I prosecute a lot of con men. And as soon as I started listening to this guy, just while I was campaigning and reading about all the small contractors that he conned out of money and ripped off and his phony university, I said to myself, this is a con guy. It was pretty clear. And truthfully, I was scared about this guy winning. And when he won, I became even more concerned about the lie after lie. It seems like he lied every time, a couple times, every time he would speak. His love, as you mentioned before, his praise for dictators, and frankly, his criticism of NATO and the fact that he's likely to bolt from NATO if he wins again. So I became very concerned, and I started writing opinion pieces as a Republican in publications all over the country, mostly Ohio newspapers, USA Today. I was on CNN, and I was basically saying, as a Republican, we need to speak up. And I challenged our then Senator Rob Portman and our Governor Mike DeWine and all the people in the Senate, U.S. Senate, saying, "Come on, guys, you got to speak up." I'd often use that expression by, I think, Edmund Burke, that the only thing necessary for evil to succeed is for good men to do nothing, which I think epitomizes your colleagues when you were in Congress, Adam, that you were the only one of very, very few, at least, willing to speak up. So when this race opened up and our incumbent Brad Wenstrup dropped out, I actually didn't think about running because it's the reddest district in Ohio. So how am I, who is known as the anti-MAGA Republican in Ohio, okay, how am I going to possibly win? Because I'm not interested in making a statement, or I want to win. Okay, well, here's what happened. A bunch of people started jumping in this race. Okay, at the time, I think there were 4 or 5. And a very close friend of mine who was my kind of political mentor, he calls me and he sort of challenged me. He says, "Phil, there," as he said it at the time, "there are 4 midgets," and that's probably not a fair way to describe it at the time, but I had a somewhat well-known name because my father is the inventor of the Heimlich maneuver. And so my name, both as his son and also as a former councilman, prosecutor, and county commissioner, was sort of well-known. But I decided, and he kind of challenged me. He said, "Look, you're writing articles. That's fine, but why don't you do something?" And he said, "Phil, even if you don't win, history," that's what he said, "history will reward you." So I got in, and in the meantime, as you just mentioned, however many, 7 more got in. So actually, you're 1 short. 1 dropped out, Adam, but it's me against 10 MAGA Republicans, and as you said, they're like crabs in a bucket trying to be more MAGA, more pro-Trump than the next. And we have a strategy, and I'm working with some people that you work with and know well. And we decided if we can just get a percentage, it's probably only about 15%, maybe 20%. That's all, with all those pro-MAGA candidates fighting over those votes. We have an excellent chance by combining the Republicans that either don't like or are just uncomfortable with Trump and a major effort to get Democrats and independents to cross over. Because as you said, we have an open ballot, open primary here in Ohio. And I was very gratified that one of the 2 Democrat candidates, as you mentioned, actually dropped out of the race to endorse me, to in effect tell Democrats, look, you got nothing to vote for in your primary, which they don't. Do something to affect our country, to make our country, to protect our democracy. Take a Republican ballot and vote for Phil Heimlich. So that's where I am here. I'm out of the campaign trail here and happy to be able to get away to speak with you.
Well, and you're the only candidate ever to have 100% name recognition around the world by the time you start. I mean, everybody knows the Heimlich maneuver. So that's great. But but you mentioned about the only needing 15 or 20%. And I want to stress that with people, which is this is a moment. If you live in Ohio's 2nd district, for instance, I mean, look, you can, if you're a hardcore Democrat, you have an opportunity to still vote Democrat in the general election, but you're going to be represented by a Republican. And so go and take a Republican ballot. And I would argue that Phil would be a great congressman even to vote for in the general. But if you know that's happening, showing up and voting in a primary is about the only place you're really going to have your say in that. So, Phil, I know you've taken a lot of arrows, and I know you've taken a lot of name calling, and I know you've taken a lot of battles for that. And, I've been in the same position. And so what would you say, kind of underline, what's your passion about why you're in this race? What is it that really matters to you that you want to give up, frankly, probably more than you're going to gain, and go to the dysfunction of Washington, D.C.?
Well, Adam, and by the way, about that Heimlich name, I always tell people, remember, genius skips generations. But as far as what you'd asked me about running, why I'm running, I'll tell you why I'm not running. I'm not running for the status. I'm not running to get a good table at restaurants. I'm not running to be called, oh, Mr. Congressman, because truthfully, I got a real nice life here where I live, and going to Washington every week or so doesn't do anything for me. But I'll tell you why I am running. I am seriously, sincerely concerned that if Donald Trump gets in, our democracy is at grave risk. I think it's at grave risk right now. You showed that, interesting, you showed that America First video, which was a meeting. Do you know, I ask people this, where the largest indoor Nazi rally was ever held? And people always think, Berlin, Munich. No, the largest indoor Nazi rally was held at Madison Square Garden in New York City, 36,000. So the point is that it can happen here. It almost happened in 2020, except for brave people like you and Raffensperger and others. I am running strictly because I want to do whatever I can do to protect our democracy. And I say this sometimes. I don't have grandkids now because I have young kids, 18 and 20, but I always say, if I have grandkids eventually, and they come up and say, hey, Grandpa, what did you do back when Trump was in office or was around? And I want to be able to say, I did everything I can. I stood up and ran to protect our democracy and make an impact. That's very important to me. I don't want to say, I just sat around, didn't do anything. I want to have an impact on this country, and more than anything, to protect our democracy, which I believe is greatly at risk.
You're speaking to my heart. I remember on the January 6th committee, I did not want to be on the committee. I didn't want it. I knew the cost. But I just remember thinking, after Pelosi asked me if I'd do it, in 10 years, my kid's going to be reading. He's only 2. He's going to be reading about this in the history books. And I don't want him to be ashamed of his last name. How can I ever talk to him about doing right and taking tough stands if I was unwilling to do it myself, And so, Phil, as somebody that's putting the country over the party and taking on MAGA, I'm sure this has cost you in terms of personal relationships, family relationships. How has that affected you? How has taking on MAGA cost you on that in terms of relationships and stuff like that? I think people would be interested.
It's funny. I'm a Christ follower, and for me, I can't face myself and I can't face Jesus if I am not speaking truth. If I'm saying things just to pander to people or tell them what they want to hear, I really can't live with myself. And I also have to say, most of my friends who don't agree with my politics, I've really been very gracious to me and kind. And in support of the people in the 2nd District, every single debate I've been in, I would say the entire audience is likely super pro-MAGA, because these are the Republican Central Committee members who tend to go that way. But in fairness, they have been extremely gracious to me. Nobody's throwing any tomatoes. Nobody's, taking a shot at me. Obviously, I get a lot of ugly posts on Facebook and a lot of that kind of stuff. But people have been very gracious, and I feel I've made some good friends, including with the party chairpersons in many areas of the district. And I'll tell you something, this really hit me. About a week ago, I was speaking at one of these groups, and they had Trump signs, literally on every corner of the wall. And they had already endorsed one of the other guys who's a big pro-Trump guy. And I knew none of these people were going to vote for me. Okay. But I stood up there and I spoke what I had to say. And I talked about how, what does it mean to be anti-MAGA? I said it means seeking the peaceful transfer of power, like George Washington did when they wanted to make him a king. And I said it also means not getting even, which is exemplified by Abraham Lincoln after the Civil War when he said, malice for none, charity towards all. And I told him it also includes, and this is something you just brought up, Adam, is standing up to brutal dictators. And I talked about how Ronald Reagan did that at the Berlin Wall in 1982 when he said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And I compared it to what's happening now, as you mentioned, that sadly a segment of our party is like the pro-Putin caucus, as they've been called. But you know something? Even though if they were nice, nobody obviously was going to support me there. But when I drove away, I had a peace. I had a peace in my heart. I don't mean to overdo that, but I'll tell you something. I'm sure you know what I mean. When you have that peace of doing what's right, it's far greater than getting an applause line or a few more votes.
You know, they call it peace that passes all understanding. As a Christ follower myself, it's powerful to hear that because, you know, sometimes it can be disheartening, you know, to see folks that call themselves Christians that are falling into this darkness. And I think it's important for people to be the light in that darkness, even in that. And I know that you are, and I know that you're at peace with what you're doing. Ladies and gentlemen, can you imagine if Phil is in Congress talking like this on the floor of the House of Representatives as a Republican, how much that can change and help. So Phil, I know you have campaign stuff to get back to. It's philheimlichforcongress.com. Is that correct? And then any other ways you want to share that people can get involved?
Well, obviously, I'm being outspent by some people in the race who have put $1 million of their own money in. So anybody who is open to supporting me at philheimlichforcongress.com, yeah, I'd really appreciate that. And I don't want to be trite, but also pray for our success in this. One other thing that would make this really kind of almost funny, Adam, this is the reddest district in Ohio, okay? But because of the fact that there are 10 or 11 other guys splitting the MAGA vote, and we're going to get crossover Democrats, we actually have an excellent chance to win. And to elect a anti-MAGA, or I like to say pro-democracy congressman from the reddest district in Ohio would, I think it would be quite something, and something that, and you know what's neat about it too? People in our party, sadly, working with the other side, with Democrats, has become a dirty word. Boy, how is that? Isn't that different from our past as a party? I think the idea of my encouraging Democrats to cross over and pledging, by the way, to work with Democrats in Congress is something that's badly needed in our party.
Well, Phil, your lips to God's ears. And on behalf of Country First, we thank you for fighting the fight, because people like you are going to be on the front lines of fighting for freedom here at home. So I know you have a campaign event you need to get back to, but God bless you and thanks for being in there, and know that Country First supports you in your endeavor, and we can't wait to see you win on election night. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
You bet. And now I'll kick it back to Andrew. Mr. Andrew.
What an inspiring conversation. I used to live in Cleveland. That's Ohio 11, but I'm calling everyone I know in Ohio right after this, telling them if you know someone in Ohio to get out and vote in just 2 weeks on March 19th for Phil. And it just, we learned a lot tonight, talking about this awesome race, this awesome opportunity our coalition has, but also how important it is that we mobilize for Ukraine. So just another reminder, country1st.com/Ukraine. There's a list of members that we've identified. And next week, we're also going to have days of action where you can jump on a call. There'll be a bunch of other volunteers and members of the movement making calls at the same time, and we'll have a script that we will circulate. And so we hope that you'll join us for our volunteers days of action. But above all, thank you for joining tonight. This was an amazing conversation. Thank you to the congressman. Thank you to all the comments that I'm seeing of everyone that is taking to social media to talk about this race, to talk about Ukraine. But also thank you just for your continued time. So with that, we're going to go into breakout rooms. This means that you have an opportunity to unmute, get on camera, tell us what you think about tonight's conversation, and meet some folks from around the country that share in this mission to put country over party. So if you go to country1st.com/breakout, you'll see there where you can choose your region, and you can meet other members from your region. So we'll leave this up for the next 5 minutes, but this is the end of the official program tonight. And again, you can join the breakout rooms to meet other members and join in the discussion. So thanks again for being here, everyone, and hope you have a great night.